Right, welcome to WeatherGod's Wisdom. As always, these thoughts are mine and mine alone. All credit goes to NASA for the satellite images and TropicalTidbits.com for providing those satellite images. And also, we're going to be talking about the tropics and the severe weather flash flooding, that event that is supposed to happen over the kind of central part of the United States. As always, as I mentioned before, these opinions are mine and mine alone, and always refer to the National Weather Service and National Hurricane Center when making decisions about all the possible threats that are pertinent to your area in the United States. So, we're going to talk about Lorenzo first. Lorenzo has just been absolutely remarkable and, just has continued to really kind of just shatter any expectation of the system. And you can see it's still a very well-defined system, has outflow coming out kind of through here on the southern side of the core. But you can see there's a very large and still pretty powerful hurricane. Winds are up to 105 miles per hour. And this is kind of beginning to undergo a baroclinic transition as it moves off to the northeast as it interacts with this trough here that we're seeing that is starting to really ventilate the system to the north. And this is going to likely continue to expand its wind field as it moves to the northeast. You can see it might interact with the Azores in here, directly. But clearly, given the size of the system, you don't really need a direct hit on any of these islands to feel extreme impacts from the system. So this is likely going to be a pretty bad hurricane for the Azores. May make landfall on the westernmost islands right in here. But this is a very large system, and it does not take a direct hit for this to really cause problems in here. And you're likely going to be dealing with probably hurricane force winds throughout these islands, even though the center may be a couple hundred miles away, and that's just because, or hurricane force winds or gusts that will be going into these islands. And so this is not something you take lightly, and please do prepare. I know these islands are pretty well prepared, but just in case, do take caution while being in the impact of this system. Again, tropical storm force wind field is very large, and power outages are a problem with this. So just, be ready. Next, we're going to talk about these two disturbances in here. You go to the National Hurricane Center. You can see, nope, not that. You've got disturbance right here and a disturbance right here. One is headed west, one is headed northeast. You go, 5-day tropical outlook. You can see that. And so this is not really a threat to land at all. It's kind of just dropping a lot of rain on the Dominican Republic and is obviously not expected to develop. And neither is this, but we've had this happen before. And so we're going to go and look at these briefly. So you can see kind of right now that steering currents have really collapsed in this region. There's not a whole lot of movement going on in here. It's kind of just a general drift off to the west here in both the upper levels and the mid levels. So this is actually kind of conducive for development in here. And you can see that there's pretty moist air out to the west of this system until it runs into the robust ridging that is happening here. It's also a trough that has brought down some continental dry air off of the United States that is kind of sitting here now. And it's a little drier, but there's some mid-level moisture in here, not much in the Gulf of Mexico. But this does not move very fast in most model runs, and you actually still see it at 3 days out. It's still in here and has not moved much. And if this were to organize, which seems unlikely right now, as most of the turning, the credit goes to University of Wisconsin for the vorticity imagery. You can see that this vorticity is pretty broad still, and you're not really seeing a whole lot of turning. it's certainly better defined than it was yesterday, but it is kind of gradually getting there, and it's not really doing a fantastic job of kind of getting organized. Sorry. And so this will kind of drift off to the west, and this is not, if it does in fact organize, I mean, the waters in here are exceptionally deep and very warm with how, just like, look at this, like, this is the maximum amount that is on the chart here, and you can see that this is a very large area of extremely deep and extremely warm waters, and ocean sea surface temperatures in here are closing in on like 32, 33 Celsius in here. And so this is not good if an organized system does end up coming out of this, because it will quite literally track along this. So it would not be surprising if you see something that kind of develops rapidly if it does organize. And that, again, is a big if, because this is clearly not organized right now. Pinpoint where the center of this is. You kind of can. And this is going to be kind of just a surface low that kind of drifts to the west and has an uncertain future from then on, because most of the dynamical models drop this. And it's likely due to the shearing and the ridge and also the mid-level dry air that is still going to be in this area, as the ridge is kind of metaphorically kind of close this off. But anyway, now we're going to get to the United States. So the kind of predominant pattern here is a very powerful trough that is slowing down over the western United States, and it has weakened a little bit. And you have this omega block that is stretching all the way up to Canada, actually. It's starting to kind of decline in here. And so what you're getting, the net push right through here, you can see a hurricane or tropical storm Narda. And yes, that is an actual name. That is pushing a lot of moisture in here, and is kind of feeding the severe potential for today. You can see that supercells are starting to fire up in Minnesota, and some stronger cells in here in Nebraska are starting to fire, and kind of just general rain in here that's firing in eastern New Mexico and far west Texas. I don't even know if it's actually in West Texas right now. I think it's mostly eastern New Mexico. But anyway, so this has kind of been a theme, and you go to the National Weather Service and hazards map, you can see there's a flash flood watch for this entire part of the country in here, and some severe thunderstorm warnings associated with these storms that are developing right now along, and even a severe thunderstorm watch in Minnesota. And so if we go back to the water vapor loop for the United States, you can see that kind of the reason that they have the severe thunderstorm watch here and not here is that it's a little more forcing in this area, because you can tell that it's not as moist of an environment, so it's not as easy for something to develop, but there's a lot of forcing that's going on in here. So if it does in fact hit a moist pocket in here, it could, a storm, of course, what I'm talking about, could in fact, become a little stronger and drop some hail and damaging winds, of course, as this kind of evolves into an upscale event and moves across Wisconsin and the northern part of Michigan in here through the evening hours. And this will eventually evolve also into a kind of upscale event as it moves through Nebraska and later Iowa and the northwestern part of Iowa, as this is more moist and requires a little less forcing. There's also enough shear for this to really get going, and you can see that with the milky white cirrus clouds that are kind of directing these storms here around this ridge. And so it's in place for some mild severe weather today. And if you go back to the Storm Prediction Center convective outlook, this kind of lines up with what I'm saying here. You've got this slight area right in here, because this is again, go back to the water vapor loop of the United States, you can see this is largely going to become a line in here that moves through Wisconsin and ultimately dissipates because of lack of, moist air in here. And as it kind of gets away from this forcing, it doesn't really do much and does kind of just dissipate over Wisconsin and northern parts of Michigan. And this is not expected to do much, but right now it has the most severe thunderstorm warnings, and that's probably because it's kind of a cluster of supercells in here, and updrafts are supported pretty well by this kind of moist environment and ample lift that is in this area. So it's not really surprising that this would develop also along like this kind of temperature gradient in here. And actually, if you go back to the true color loop, you can kind of see right here there's like a pseudo front that's kind of along this line here that I'm drawing. And so that will allow for, this to start developing and stuff, and pretty decent severe weather outbreak that is going to happen. Probably some hail in here, and maybe an isolated tornado. Always be on the lookout for that. I know I always am. And, just have a good evening, and I'll leave you with the temperature outlook for tomorrow. As you can see, this sucks. You can see where the trough is over Montana, and the ridge is over the southeastern United States, which is kind of starting to degrade. You can see the cold front is starting to work its way southeastward, and you can see it's actually 60 in here in South Dakota versus, upper 90s or lower 90s in Nebraska. And this is starting to work its way down, but ultimately it is going to be a while before this part of the country specifically, because it is embedded in this very deep ridge. Again, we're going to look back at the ridging that is over the United States here. And you can see that it's going to take a lot for this ridge to degrade, but towards the end of the forecast period, and the reliable forecast period, which is like 5 days, you'll start to see, a decline in this ridge and a more troughy pattern that is going to be a more fall-like pattern, essentially, that is going to be working its way across the United States as this ridge finally collapses. And believe me, I'm saying finally because I live in Texas and I'm experiencing this firsthand. Anyway, that's all for tonight. As always, credit goes to Levi Cowan at Tropical Tidbits and the University of Wisconsin and NASA for all the satellite imagery. I thank you guys so much for watching. I love you guys.